Good afternoon, good morning to everybody. My name's Henry Coles. Welcome to this Restart webinar on the reinvigoration activity on the Multilateral Interline framework. Just a few quick housekeeping notes. The webinar today will be recorded. We will have an opportunity for some questions at the end of the webinar, and you're most welcome to put those directly into the question box within the webinar tool at any time. And we'll get to those towards the end. We will be sharing the slides and a set of materials following this webinar. So if you do miss anything, please don't worry, we'll be sending those out very shortly. So I am the head of airline distribution standards here at IATA. I'm joined today by my colleagues Wana Sabu and Anka Dolikin from the standards team. We also have Julie Vandenbush, who's on the line from IATA Legal Counsel. And just a really important point on the competition law guidelines before we get moving. We will be talking today around some of the activity IATA runs in the space of Interline, but we won't be discussing or answering any questions on any points regarding an airline's own commercial policies or the decision an airline must make independently. And that includes a lot of things like pricing and fares and charges. It also includes things like capacity or the allocation of markets, remuneration to travel agents, or any of those other commercial or strategic decisions. So all of the questions today will be reviewed by our legal counsel, and we will only be responding to those that we're able to address. Any other questions, we'd follow up directly with those who asked the question. Okay, so what we're looking at today is the reinvigoration of multilateral interline that's part of IATA's restart activity. So we'll be looking at what that restart activity is. We'll be looking at some of the tools that already exist to help airlines form new partnerships within the IATA multilateral framework. And we'll be talking about some of the considerations that airlines need to take a bit of a look at given the response to the pandemic. We're then going to look at some of the changes that we're exploring to standards and to the multilateral agreements as part of this activity. And we're going to focus in on a key part of that activity, which is the new Interline information repository. And then, as mentioned, we'll have a little bit of opportunity at the end just to respond to any of your questions. So before we move into the Interline topic itself, just a very brief introduction to provide some context on the industry restart activity. So as a response to the pandemic, IATA has paused a lot of existing activity, particularly activity around industry transformation, and we've focused instead on emergency priorities. And that's typically been around cash generation, cost reduction, and then looking ahead to industry restart. And when it comes to the industry restart, we now have a plan of attack that's been endorsed by our board of governors, which is airline CEOs, and that's focused on system restart, things like system capability, getting aircraft back in the sky, getting pilots back operating aircraft, and travel experience, particularly in the airport space, making sure things are safe and secure and clean. And then focusing also on demand restart, and that's looking at things like restoring passenger confidence, working with border control authorities and regulators to ensure that we can have a smooth movement of passengers, but also looking at demand stimulation. And so the Interline piece was identified as a very key building block forming part of demand stimulation. And so that's what we're looking at today. I'm going to hand over to Wana now, and we're just going to provide a little bit of an overview of what Interline is and how it impacts the restart. So Wana, over to you.
Thank you, Henry. And before we're looking into that overview, let's first of all define what Interline is, and let's first of all look into what is Interline, first of all, from a passenger perspective. In short, is an itinerary on more than one airline that has been purchased in a single transaction. One ticket, one price, one currency, everything coming in one shot from that single transaction. And Interline, from a passenger standpoint, it also means seamless transfer of that passenger and of his or her baggage during the travel journey. also means a reprotection when things go wrong, like disruption scenarios. If it is to define and to look what interline is from an airline perspective, it's any relationship where one airline sells a ticket where another airline operates any of the flight. Or if it is to see that from the operating carrier perspective, means carrying a passenger that has been ticketed by another airline. And this might be in a connecting itinerary, or where the issuing carrier is part or is not part or participating in this itinerary. Airlines do typically refer to the code share separately to interline, although code share is just a special type of interline. One of the main reasons airlines are doing interline is to expand their networks and to access new markets. So that being said, why interline? It's so important in the restart phase. During the restart, airlines will restore their operations at different times and at different speeds due to the current situation and the current crisis we have today due to the COVID-19. And the slow restore of these scheduled operations will limit their connectivity, and therefore, in order to support their networks and to maintain this connectivity, airlines will need to pursue new and more varied types of partnership. So that's why looking and reinvigorating the multilateral interline allows airlines to establish new partnerships more quickly and more simpler, and as well support them to explore new type of partnerships, which is very important. Now I will hand over to Henry to present you more details about the current tools we have today in our multilateral framework.
Thanks, Wana. So as Wana mentioned, there's maybe a bit of a case to explore new partnerships as part of Restart. And really important to sort of note that there are many, many different agreements that form an interline partnership. And these sort of focus on a core set of agreements to support the interlining of a passenger and their bag, together with some other agreements that might put in place a closer form of partnership, things like code share, as Wana mentioned, perhaps an even closer form of partnership such as a joint venture. If we look at those core agreements that form a partnership, we have things like a legal interline agreement, a set of agreed procedures or behaviors. We have some technical connectivity with system-to-system interfaces. And then from a commercial perspective, we have some basis on which revenue might be shared or value is built between carriers. And in establishing these agreements, there's a number of different tools that are available to airlines today. So most fundamentally, we have a lot of IATA standards, and as IATA member airlines, you are bound by the IATA resolutions. And so these form almost the foundation agreement between IATA members, particularly around things like procedures. We then have a number of other IATA standards that define things like technical connectivity and data exchange, and we have the IATA multilateral agreements. So things like the META agreement, for forming a legal interline agreement, but also industry agreements that IATA manages, such as the ZMEBA agreement, such as the multilateral prorate agreement, and others. Beyond the IATA standards and the IATA multilateral agreements, there's also a number of agreements that airlines form themselves. And these may be formed separately to complement or replace an IATA standard or an IATA multilateral agreement, or they might be formed because they address things that are inherently commercial in nature, and so IATA would never become involved. Finally, we kind of have these alliance agreements that often just sit over the top of this framework, and to the extent that they are permitted by law, the alliances might manage the harmonization of some of these agreements or some of the processes for passengers across a group of airlines. And so the important thing today is that we would like to make sure that everyone is aware of things like the IATA standards and the multilateral agreements, because they're tools in the toolbox that you can use in establishing new relationships. We'd also just like to draw your attention to some of the activity that's underway to improve those standards in the multilateral agreements, and also some of the activity that's underway to make things a little bit easier when it comes to the bilateral agreements, resources that have been developed, or other tools that you may use to make life a little bit easier. We've just got a slight delay in the slide here, just give us a minute. There we go. All right. So if we look at the IATA standards, IATA standards cover a lot of the processes that support Interline, and this touches everything from scheduling through to fares and availability, reservations and ticketing, and then things that happen in the airport environment with DCS check-in and baggage movement. Finally, from a financial perspective, we have standards that touch things like proration and interline billing. And these standards support the IATA settlement systems that are also in place to reduce cost and complexity for airlines, things like the SIS platform for invoicing exchange and the clearinghouse for the settlement of interline billing. So once again, these standards do form almost the foundation of an agreement between interline partners, in that the IATA resolutions bind all IATA members. So really, really important that you have access to all of these IATA standards and that you're comfortable having these discussions between partners. A lot of the groundwork has often been done in that a procedure is described within an IATA standards. So things like resolutions and recommended practices are always published in the conference resolution manual. A lot of these sit under our passenger standards conference and they're published within that manual. We also separately publish things like the reservations and scheduling manuals and the revenue accounting manual. Finally, on the data exchange side, we have a lot of data exchange formats that prescribe how information is exchanged between systems, and these are often supported by things like implementation guides. Increasingly, we are making those publicly available on the developer.iata.org site. For the legacy data exchange standards that we're in the process of migrating onto that site, we typically publish those within the conference resolution manual. So if you're not aware of who in your airline has access to those manuals, please let us know. A lot of airlines are already subscribing to these manuals, and it's just a matter of working out who has access to these things. The other point with standards is that you as airlines are the ones that develop these standards. So where there's something that should be in a standard to avoid a lot of bilateral discussions and bilateral agreements, and it's not there, it's as simple as bringing that into the industry discussion around standards development. And there's a lot of information available online on the different groups where airlines participate with system providers and with other stakeholders to have these conversations and continue developing the standards. So one of the more important standards when it comes to Interline is Resolution 780, which gives us the text of our Multilateral Interline Traffic Agreement. And this resolution is a little bit different from the other resolutions in that it creates this multilateral contractual agreement under which airlines may choose to implement a legal relationship. And what this is all about is really avoiding the complexity and duplication of every airline having to separately negotiate a legal interline agreement with every other one of their partners. So the Multilateral Interline Agreement is one agreement. It's developed and published as a resolution, and any airline can decide that they want to become a party to that agreement. There's two really important steps to creating a legal relationship under the meter. So the first step is becoming a party, and that's free to do. It's very easy to do online. But then the second step is forming a concurrence under the meter. So once you're a party to the agreement, you can choose to form a concurrence with any other party. And as soon as both airlines have agreed to that concurrence, they've concurred, an agreement is formed. And that's how the meter works. So in terms of managing your concurrences under the meter, we have an online tool, which is the Meter Customer Portal, where any member of your team is able to sign up, log in, and view who you have meter concurrences with. We are slowly migrating a lot of the content that previously sat on our Meter extranet site into this portal. So if you don't have access to the portal, that's a really key one to look into. Then in terms of publishing information about who has Meter concurrences more generally, we have a number of tools. The first is the Meter extranet that I mentioned, and this is a sort of subscriber-only platform. Any airline who's a party to the Meter and has concurrences can have access to this tool, and a lot of the things like bulletins of new concurrences are published there on the extranet site. As I mentioned, we're slowly looking to migrate that over so that the customer portal is the one-stop shop for interactions with the Meter environment. We also do continue to publish Meter concurrences and participation in the Meter in two important ways. One is the Meter manual, and this is a publication that is provided within our e-reader format. It's published once a year. It includes all of the concurrences. It includes the full text of all of the agreements, and it also includes some other things like bilateral interline e-ticketing agreements, and membership of the clearinghouse and things like that that could be useful for when you're forming interline relationships. Finally, we do have a batch file format of this data, so data that can be consumed by a system that shows which airlines have concurrences with other airlines, and that data is available for a daily update. So again, key action here for airlines is make sure you have access to the Meter customer portal and the Meter extranet. And where you need access to that broader set of information, you have the Meter manual and the Meter daily file available. I'm going to hand back over to Ana now, and we're just going to look at some of the other multilateral agreements and utilities that exist to make some of these agreements easier to form.
And to start with, thank you, Henry. I will start by mentioning the first one, which is the multilateral agreement, under which the revenue division of through fare can be agreed between carriers partners, and this is supported by the MPAP. Then there are also a set of agreements that airlines can form and support the agreement to facilitate the leisure travel for staff member, and another one to facilitate the duty travel for staff members, known as the Z and the MIBA agreements. There is also the multilateral agreement to share the hotel expenses, under which airlines can concur on the arrangements regarding the absorption and the prorating of the passengers' expenses en route. And this is supported via the recommended practice 1775. And last but not least, there is the ATPCO RPT service, also known as the ATPCO Chart 1 and Chart 2, which is, according to the IATA recommended practice 1728, the recommended source of the carrier's mapping of booking classes for the IATA member airlines. If you would want to know more and find more information about all these type of agreements, please consult the initial paper we have published on the 19th of May, where you can find how to contact and how to access all these templates and agreements. Apart that, the other aspect, which is very important, is around the system connectivity. And the technical interfaces and the messages are needed to support the end-to-end interline processes. So the data exchange format and the associated processes, most of them are being defined by the IATA standards. However, there are some specific aspects of configurations that needs to be established bilaterally between partners, such as the electronic ticketing, reservation, interline through check-in, usually supported by the IACHI messages, the baggage messaging, or the departure control. The general business requirement documents, the GBR, known as GBR, can be used between the airline parties to support the configuration and the testing of their systems. And for example, the Interline electronic ticket GBR and the EMD GBR are two of the examples and the templates that have been published by IATA and that can be used by the airlines when entering and configuring their systems.
Thanks, Juana. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview of just some of the tools that are already in the toolbox to help you out with new relationships. We're going to be talking a little bit later on some of the changes to standards and multilateral agreements that are being worked on. What we're going to just do in the meantime is just have a look at a few of the things that you might need to be thinking about with your existing partnerships as restart starts to occur. And really the key thing here is that nothing in the industry at the moment is quite normal. And as I'm sure you're all aware, schedules are all looking a little bit funny, operations are restarting at different times, and many airlines are doing things just a little bit differently as they manage their restart and they manage some of the impacts of the pandemic and the interruption to travel. So now's a really, really good time to be talking to each of your partners about any of these changes in the way you're operating your business to avoid any issues for customers before they occur, and also to avoid any sort of disputes or disagreements when it comes to settlement and other aspects of the financial back office. So there's just a few points here that have come up that you may find useful. There's many other things that could be added to this list. The first one here is irregular operations. So we have a really clear definition in IATA resolution now defining an irregular operation as opposed to a planned schedule change. That was made in the resolution a couple of years ago. But we do know as part of this crisis, a lot of airlines are taking a slightly more flexible approach to this with their own policy, and perhaps they're considering slightly more circumstances as irregular operations than they otherwise would be. That's to give their own teams a little bit more flexibility, or perhaps provide more flexibility to passengers. So really a good time to be having this conversation with partners as to whether they perhaps are changing their policy, or whether they may wish to bilaterally agree to slightly relax or extend their policies there. The other point with irregular operations is that we do now have a requirement in Resolution 766 that there needs to be a bilateral agreement between partners on the booking method for obtaining inventory in an irregular operation. So we used to have a lot of confusion about this in the industry. We made a change a couple of years ago that established that need for a bilateral process. This could be booking from availability, it could be using the data exchange messages specifically designed for IROPS, or it could be something completely different like a phone call or an email. Most important thing is the bilateral agreement. But now's a really good time to be checking in with partners on this to make sure that whatever process you've agreed still makes sense. A lot of people might be doing things slightly differently, and the volumes might be a little bit higher at the moment. The second point here is ticketing validity. We have resolutions defining standard validity for documents, but we know that a lot of airlines are just slightly relaxing policies or extending this beyond the standard 12 months. This is not a problem, but it does just require a little bit of a conversation with your interline partners if this starts to touch tickets that have interline content, or where you're an operating carrier and your partner may be extending their validity. There's a little bit of conversation still happening within the standard setting groups around whether we could possibly look to do this as an industry standard, and what the impacts might be on the settlement systems. But where you are doing this bilaterally in the meantime, please talk to your partners. Next one is infants and children policies. And this is something that we no longer have any IATA standard on. It's completely up to each airline to commercially determine how they define a child or an infant. But what we have sort of been aware of is that while lockdown has occurred and passengers haven't been flying, someone who may have been an infant just before lockdown may now be ready to fly and may no longer be an infant. Similarly, someone who's a child may now sort of be an adult. And so a lot of airlines are allowing a little bit of flexibility with their policies here. And where this touches interline carriage, really important you're just having these conversations between partners. This does just require a really simple agreement between partners as to whether you will allow some flexibility and perhaps honour someone who's ticketed as an infant, even if they're just slightly over your established policy. Finally, a couple of points: staff and duty travel embargoes. A lot of carriers are just limiting duty or staff travel just while they get operations back up and running. A good time just to touch base between teams and make sure you have a complete understanding of what's out there and what's available. And then lastly, on the minimum connecting time. So a lot of additional screening requirements are now in place in a lot of airports. Where this is impacting the ability of passengers to connect, you may wish to have a really good look at your carrier exceptions to minimum connecting times. So there's currently no discussion on amending the standard global default MCT times, which are established by resolution. But there is just the opportunity as a carrier to adjust your carrier exception times. In terms of the station defaults, the airport default MCTs, those are established by local committees of operators and the airport. And so where you are represented within those local committees at each airport, you may wish to be having a discussion about whether the station default needs to be amended slightly if new procedures are in place. So just something to be thinking about to ensure that you're still maintaining connectivity there. I am going to hand back over to Ana at this point, and we're going to change track slightly onto some of the activities that have been underway as part of this reinvigoration exercise. Ana.
Thank you, Henry. What I would like to do in the coming minutes is to provide you a bit more insights about the latest work we have been running to reinvigorate the multilateral interline framework. I will just wait. And it's very important to start that we've started this at the direction of the IATA Board of Governors, and we've started this immediate package of work that has been launched with a specific focus on the existing multilateral interline framework. And the primary objective of this work is really to look and make the formation of new interline relationships simpler and faster. From an industry governance standpoint, the interline group that is formed under the conference governance structure is very much involved and supporting the activities that are part of this short-term package of works. And these activities can be categorized into three key main pillars around standard and multilateral agreements, around services that IATA can provide to the industry and to the airline members to support the formation of new interline partnerships, and last but not least, around education and awareness. So what I'm going to do in the coming minutes is to present you a bit more insights about what do we actually have in each of these categories, and yes, what's coming for the coming weeks and the coming months. So first of all, let's look into the activities we are currently having in the standards and the multilateral agreement. And here I will start with the first one, which is actually one of the key ones, around MITA. And the approach we have taken when we looked into what we currently have today in the current distribution environment, we've taken, first of all, MITA, the MITA agreement supported today via the resolution 780. And our main objective when it comes to that was to make MITA easier when forming a new partnership, easier to understand, easier to discuss it with this new partner, and easier, I would say, in easy words, to digest. So from that standpoint, we've done really, the focus was to do more of a cleanup in terms of simplifying the language of this existing MITA. So just try to address the archaic language we've been having in this resolution and make it much more simpler. But also we have been looking and introducing some of the things that airlines usually agree on a bilateral basis. And again, the objective was really to simplify and ease the formation of partnerships. But very important to highlight, no major changes to the MITA structure and what we have in the MITA today have been done part of this activity. The other work we have been conducting with the help of the Interline group was around the baseline checklist. And what does it mean? We have been working to identify and to list a set of recommendations that airline can take and can use when forming and when looking to implement a new type of partnership. So various recommendations looking to the end-to-end workflow, starting from the formation of the legal framework up to recommendations, for example, around reservation, ticketing, operational aspects, up to billing and proration and billing. The aim is to capture and to have all these captured and proposed via a new recommended practice. Yes. And then the third one is around, very similar with the first one, the aim was to look and to identify and provide a set of recommendations that can be used when establishing interline processes between ticketing airlines together with ticketless airlines. Similarly, it's really to identify all the aspects from an end-to-end standpoint that airlines need to think about and need to discuss, address, and agree with their new interline partner, especially when this new interline partner is being a ticketless carrier. And similarly, the aim is to capture all that and to propose them via a new recommended practice. So as an action item for you, we would say, please keep an eye on the agenda of the IATA PES Standard Conference, as these three items, the changes to the current Resolution 780 and these two new recommended practices, are going to be part of. And they are going to be proposed for voting and endorsement for the conference in November. Something important to highlight, and Henry has mentioned as well, is that we have these new recommended practices being done this year. However, it doesn't mean that in the coming years, if there is a need, this cannot be further enhanced. So as well, an action item would be, have a look, and if in the future you would want to be more involved or to be closer to this type of work and to help on improving these frameworks, we would be more than happy to discuss with you and have you on board of all these discussions. So check your internal representative for the conference, get in touch with him, and yes, know more about these ones once they're going to be published in September. This is what we're currently doing now, with a clear focus on having deliverables for the coming weeks and months. However, the other question is what's next. So what I would just want to share with you from a mid-long-term perspective is that still at the direction of our IATA Board of Governance, from a mid-long-term perspective, we will continue to focus on aspects such as the cross-selling of ancillaries and to investigate hybrid approaches on offer and order-based interline. The goal will remain to continue to provide immediate opportunities and to provide tangible early benefits and added value, and as well to support some longer-term improvements to the interline framework. We will very much leverage on the work that has been started last year in the future of interline, and looking to continue this work and this exploration, taking into consideration and having in mind as well the possibilities to explore and to have new and more types of partnerships. Now I'm going to hand over to Anka to provide you more insights about what we're currently working on in terms of ease the access to interline information.
Thank you, Mana. So you have heard so far from Henry and Mana how important new partnerships are for our industry restart. In the next couple of slides, I will talk to you about a couple of services that IATA also focuses on to support these new industry partnerships. So if we move to the next slide, please. The first one that I'm referring to is enhancing and refreshing the existing MITA contact information. Together with our colleagues in the IATA local offices, we're working to enhance the existing MITA manual with the relevant and refreshed interline contacts. Our focus will be mainly on the contacts of interline agreement managers, of passenger protection agreement managers, as we believe that they will facilitate the first contacts and will support the development of these partnerships. In addition to the refreshed MITA contacts list, we have also started compiling more interline information in a unique repository made public already on our iata.org. But before showing you a few details of this repository, I would like to start by explaining where this idea comes from. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we have noticed that today there is a lack of a single place for airline to lay out their interline information. Therefore, the new partnerships are more difficult to be started. At the same time, the interline information is not structured and it's difficult to find it in a user-friendly way. So this lack of visibility on the minimum information needed to start discussions is obviously bringing partners to retard their discussions, and it's quite dissuasive. So the legal premises that we have started from are that the airlines should provide the information, they should validate the information, and they should update it. We will also make this repository public on iata.org, as it contains only public available information. Of course, we are going to also include a web link to airlines public web page where this information is contained. And last but not least, in terms of format, the legal premises is that we will have this document protected for editing, but in the format of an Excel file for the to enable usage, easier usage. So if we move to the next slide, I will talk to you about the solution. So as I've mentioned before, this is the interline information repository, which is already published on iata.org webpage. This is a tool that offers support for new partnerships through a single and easily accessible source of information on systems, billing and settlement, and last but not least, contacts. So as I mentioned before, you have also the the web link to the airline web page and the relevant contact information. Currently, we have 15 airlines listed in the repository, but we're looking to increase this number, and we're working closely with our colleagues in the local offices to support the collection of this information from you, as the benefits of having such a repository are definitely an increase of transparency and time to action between new partners. If you're an airline, we would kindly ask you to check this repository on iata.org/interline webpage. This is a webpage that we have created where we are publishing all the activities related to multilateral interline framework, including the repository of information. If you're interested to be part of this repository, please contact us or at the email address that I've provided in this link, or please go to your account from the IATA local office and request a template file that once completed, you'll be sending it back to us, and then we are going to publish it in the repository. One important thing is that once your information will be made available in the repository, you will need to let us know if any information, if anything has changed in there. So this is very important to maintain and to ensure an accurate information for the future. So this being said, I think we reached the part with where Wana will talk to you about the education and awareness activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Anka. For the next section, I would just like to highlight the key activities we have currently under this industry education and awareness. There are a couple of papers and guidance documents, either we have been published, either we are about to publish, and these are, I will start with the first one, which is the information paper we have previously shared with the industry. It was on the 19th of May. The other two about to come are around a guidance paper around the irregular operations. This paper, the aim of this paper is really to capture all the various considerations, very much relying on the existing pieces we have today in our standards, the various standards, and looking to the end-to-end processes and aspects that airlines should think about or should consider in case of these irregular operations. This paper is about to be published, and we're going to show and share with you afterwards the web page where you would be able to access this paper. The next one to come is a guidance document on baggage, and similarly with the previous one, the primary objective of this paper is to present to airlines and to industry stakeholders what are the various considerations when it comes to baggage, and especially the baggage handling in case of interlining, from an end-to-end perspective, starting from how carriers can share among themselves the baggage provisions, looking into the reservation, ticketing, the operational aspects, and ending with the billing and settlement aspects around baggage. Last but not least, just to highlight, this paper is very much based and focused on the current pieces we have today and that stands today in the various standards or in the various implementation guidelines documents that have been published previously. I've mentioned already a couple of times, and we can go to the next slide. Anka have mentioned an Interline webpage, and we're more than happy to share with you that we have recently worked and built a common repository where you can go and access all the various information you would need around multilateral interline framework, that being around current utilities, agreements, the standards that we have. Anka has just introduced you the new repository we have been working on. And last but not least, the two papers I have just introduced to you around the IROPS and baggage. You can also access them via this webpage. So, that being said, I think we can go to the wrap-up section just to end this webcast and to allocate a little bit of time for questions. A couple of actions we would want to highlight before ending this session for you. I would start with the first one, going again through the flow of the agenda. We strongly recommend you to get more familiar, if it's not the case today, with all the various tools and elements we have today, part of the IATA Multilateral Interline Framework. Check our initial paper, check the website we have just introduced to you, check the various documents, the various informations you find there. And if there is more you would want to know, don't hesitate to contact us. Then we've been introducing to you a couple of activities we're currently working. So a lot of them, or many of them, around standards, updates or new things to come on when it comes to standards. So for these ones, I would just say keep an eye on the agenda that is coming for the passenger conference standards in September. Check internally who is your representative for the conference and get in touch. And last but not least, very important, the Interline information repository. It's very important that you're part of it, so don't hesitate if you're not already there today. Please contact us and please share this information with us and make sure you're part of this repository. And that being said, I think we can go to the Q&A section.
Perfect, thanks, Juana. So we've got a little bit of time for questions. There's quite a few in the box already. If you haven't put your question in, now's the time. There's a few easy ones I can take just straight off the bat. Can we share the slides? Yes, we absolutely can, and those will come out after the webinar. There's a question around the cost of IATA membership. We will contact the attendee who asked that question directly. It's just easier if our team gets in touch with you. And then there's a few questions here just around the cost of involvement in the repository. So perhaps, Anka, you could just run us through this. Is there a cost involved in sharing information or accessing information there?
Absolutely not. That's very easy. No, not any cost is foreseen for this. We are making available for the industry free of charge this tool. It's just to simplify the contacting between the parties. That's all there is to it.
Perfect. Okay. There's some questions here about where we can find the different publications. I think the easiest resource there is the website that Juana just mentioned, but we'll send out the links to that with the materials. There's some questions here as well around are we looking to sort of digitalize how we distribute meter data, and I guess that's referring to things like concurrence data and what's on the extranet versus the customer portal. Juana, is there anything you can add there around the portal developments or on that one?
There are a couple of enhancements that we have been working and that there are already available today via the Meta customer portal. And I think maybe it's interesting and important to highlight one of these, which is an airline today that has access to this customer portal, also has the capability to see all the Interline, the list of all the Interline partners that they have today under the Meta concurrence.
Okay. There's a question around can system providers access the meter concurrences in a machine readable format, and that would be the meter daily file that I mentioned, but I can make sure that our products team get in touch with the attendee that asked that question, and we can approach that offline. There's a question here around NDC Interline, and Juana, that might be one for you, just to kind of link in where does this activity sit versus the longer term exploration into offer and order Interline.
Okay, so I would not call it NDC Interline. I would just start by saying that since last year, we have been doing work around future of Interline and really looking into the Interline framework more from a retailer supplier approach, very much based on this offer and order concept and relying on the new distribution standards in terms of interaction between various parties and partners. This work, for the time being, has been put on pause due to the current situation. However, as I've been mentioning, from a mid-long-term perspective, we're looking to leverage and to retake some of the pieces we have started to work and to explore last year, and explore some of the use cases such as the cross-selling of ancillaries, or even the use cases like ticketing ticketless, but very much relying on this offer, again, an order-based interaction, relying on the new distribution capability standards.
Perfect, thanks. So there's definitely more work to come on that one. Kind of connected to this one is the question on EMD. So what is the IATA position on Interline EMD? Sort of questions about implementation. Perhaps I can have a go at this one. The EMD standards are very much there. So I think you rightly point out this is a question of implementation. It's not quite as simple as saying no one has implemented Interline EMD, because there are quite a few airlines that have done this, and this is something that is published on that Meter Extranet site. But it is perhaps fair to say that there are certainly less airlines that have Interline EMD connectivity than have Interline electronic ticket connectivity. So that's definitely something that forms part of this future of Interline exploration, in terms of how can we make ancillaries and non-transportation services much more cohesively part of the Interline environment, even beyond EMDs, looking at offers and orders and things like that. Lana, did you want to add anything on ancillaries there in terms of future of Interline?
That, I would say, future of Interline, as you've been mentioning, is looking to address one of these key pain points we have today, because yes, we do agree and we do acknowledge that even if the standards are there, this is still one of the use cases that we're trying to crack in the industry, and that we're trying to widely use and adopt and implement. So hopefully with the future of Interline and with all this offer and order-based interaction and new concepts such as the product catalog, we will be able to ease and unlock more benefits and value from these use cases. Perfect.
Okay, sounds good. Just a few minutes to run. So there's a few other questions on the repository of information and the contact list and things like that. Perhaps just a point to make really clear as well, just in case we didn't cover this, is the idea with expanding the contact list would not be to replace any of the existing places that contacts are mentioned in standards. So for example, within the revenue accounting manual, we established the fact that the SIS platform continues to be a tool where financial contacts are published. So we absolutely wouldn't be replacing that. It's more around just bringing the contacts into one place and slightly expanding this to other areas of the airline. There were a few points around the repository, around the frequency of updates and things like that. So Anka, I don't know if you could just comment briefly on how often that would be updated or how live the information would be.
Absolutely. So we are collecting this information. We have already started, and we are in the process of collecting this information. In terms of updates, as soon as there are any changes, we are expecting the airlines to let us know, and then we will update it in real time. Otherwise, we will run biannual campaigns every now and then with our local offices as well, so they can also support us in updating the information. So basically, yeah, we're counting on you to have it updated, but we are also going to come forth and try to keep it as fresh as possible.
Perfect. Sounds good. So I think we'll wrap up at this point. Thank you very, very much for everyone for taking time out of your busy days to hear about this activity. Looking forward to being in touch with you more on some of these initiatives across this year. And as always, if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly or through your local IATA teams. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.